Why is it important for people to participate in politics at a time when so many people see governmental institutions failing the average person?
Well, I think the answer is right there in the question, actually. First of all, I'm so happy to be here with you all. And we were just talking backstage about how exciting it is to be a part of this conference and the great history of speakers who have been here and students and participants who have been here and the sort of movement and energy that we've seen and heard. So I'm so happy to have the opportunity to be with you today. And you asked, why is it important to be a part of government when you see government failing to fulfill so many of its basic obligations? And I think that's exactly why, right? Because we are in this moment where the American dream feels and is profoundly out of reach for so many people, right? This idea that that we're going to build a better life than the lives of our parents, of our previous generations, that feels impossible to too many of us. And it's impossible not by some accident or by our, not trying hard enough, as some folks will, millennials, they're so lazy, they're sitting around their basement. We know that's not true, right? It's impossible, it's being denied to us by failures of public policy. That our society is structured in such a way that only a very few people at the very top of the totem pole are going to be able to pass along that better life to their children. And the rest of us are going to see stagnation and backslide, right? And in order to change that, there's only one tool powerful enough to change the way that economy and society is structured, and that's government. Government's the only entity that has the ability to restructure our society in such a way that really lifts up folks from the bottom and doesn't just benefit the folks at the very top. And right now, government is failing. It is failing to do that. It is fundamentally allowing the vast majority of us to get trampled by the forces of greed and politics and special interests. And if we want to stop that, we have to roll up our sleeves and get into the messy, ugly work of getting involved in government, getting involved in public policy, and using that instrument, government, to make our world a more fair and just place.
One of the things that I think about why it's so important to participate is that even if you're not engaged, you will be affected by the choices that are made. I talk to so many people who say politics just seems abysmally toxic, and so they want to retreat from it. But the reality is that even if you retreat from it, you are still impacted by the decisions that are made. And so when people are making decisions that are affecting your life, you want to be at that table. You want to have somebody who is advocating for your interests. The other reason why I think it's so important to be involved is because so many people have risked so much for us to have the opportunity to be involved. When I ran for office last year, I realized that if I won, I would have been the first Black woman to ever be elected to Attorney General in Illinois. And that was significant because my grandmother, who just turned 98 years old, was born at a time in which voting was a challenge, let alone being able to run for public office. And so when you think about the people who risked their life, who risked their livelihood, for you to be able to have that opportunity, I feel like it doesn't do justice to their contributions if you sit passively on the sideline.
I spent 7 years at city colleges, and listening to my students talk about the challenges that were facing them in the city of Chicago, and also those same issues resonated in me as a small business owner. And so that's one of the reasons that I decided to run, Erika, is because I just wasn't seeing the needle move for folks that look like you and I and my students. And I think that's the piece of the puzzle for the students that are in the audience today. We know that our city is facing an uphill battle with several challenges: violence, poor education system, not having enough money to be able to fund city services, and the list goes on and on and on. Representative Guzzardi mentioned something that was important. It's government that can change these things. We can certainly be on the sidelines, but in order to affect change, you want to be inside of the tent and being able to move the needle forward. And so that's what I would share to students, that if you want to see change, get involved, and get involved in your political system with all the craziness that's going on, particularly nationally. you can affect change locally by getting involved.
Why should students get involved in campaigns? What do they stand to gain from this involvement?
One thing that I would say to a student who's thinking about whether being part of a campaign is for them is that volunteering on a campaign is a very low pressure entry point. You don't have to make your first entree into politics declaring for running for office yourself. You can find someone who inspires you and go to be part of their campaign. And I encourage people who want to volunteer, be willing to identify for them issues that you care about and ways that you can use your unique skill set to advance their message. So a lot of times when people think of campaigns, they think, well, I don't want to lick envelopes and I don't want to just knock on doors. There are so many ways that you can be engaged, whether it's through digital, social movements, or you could be going as a surrogate to speak on behalf of the candidate. But it gives you a sense of what politics is like and how your skill set might be a match. And then if you come with issues that are important to you, make sure the candidate knows that. I had someone who volunteered on my campaign. They were very interested in social justice issues. And so I said, well, I want you to take the first stab at working on some anti-bullying policies. And I wanted that young volunteer, who was a college student, to feel that her contribution was valued. And I think if candidates take that perspective, then it can be a really worthwhile civic engagement point for everybody.
Erika's absolutely right about all that. Two more things about getting involved in campaigns. The first is that especially I encourage folks to get involved, particularly in local and state elections, right? Because you could sign up to volunteer for so-and-so for president, and you're going to, the person you're going to meet is going to be the deputy field deputy, right? If you sign up to canvass for Lamont Robinson for state representative, odds are when you show up to the office, you're going to see Lamont Robinson there, right? Or is Lamont Robinson's campaign manager, right? So at this local level, you also can be given a lot more responsibility, like Erika was saying, that our campaigns are small enough to the point where we need volunteers to help us write policy briefs or go speak on our behalf, all that stuff. The other thing I want to add about it is that if you yourself are considering running for office, just to sort of put a finer point on it, on day one, you're going to need staff. And you're going to need a list of people who might prospectively volunteer for you, right? And you're going to need to know how to set up a campaign office and run one. And so if you do what Erika was saying and just sort of dive into, I want to get involved in politics, so I'm running for office tomorrow, how are you going to know who to call? Where are your volunteers going to come from, right? Like, who's your staff going to be? I think I felt very lucky in my career in that I got involved sort of through journalism. And so I covered a bunch of campaigns and met a ton of really smart campaign people just through being a reporter and going around meeting the field director and meeting the communications person. So when I wanted to run for office myself, I had a network of folks who I knew. And so I think volunteering is a great entree into that world to start meeting those staff folks, those other fellow volunteers who might want to come out for your race. It'll give you this sort of a sense of the flavor of what campaign life is like. I think it's invaluable, really, before you start wanting to get into running for office yourself.
Representative Guzzardi, you mentioned invaluable experience. As a educator and someone that has taught entrepreneurship, I would always tell my students, if you're thinking about running a business and you want to own your own business, go work in a business. Learn how a business operates. Whatever that business is, you will get some invaluable experience. And it's the same thing working on campaigns. By working in a campaign, it's really like running a business, right? And there's so many different avenues that you can get involved in. It's just not about canvassing or licking envelopes. As Erika mentioned, if you are a social media expert, certainly that is an area, and I know for me, as being newly elected, it is an area that I struggled with. But it is a much-needed area in any campaigns now that you have Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat, and the list goes on. And so there are certainly key areas that are in a campaign that could fit your appetite and what your interests are. I'll give you a great example. I wanted to get involved in the mayoral campaign a couple years ago when Karen Lewis, Chicago Teachers Union president, fell ill. I worked for Chuy Garcia and his campaign. Just by canvassing, low-level canvasser, going out into my community, sharing Chuy Garcia's information. And at one of the meetings, they asked that Chuy Garcia needed a driver. And I raised my hand. Well, through that campaign, I became Chuy Garcia's driver. I learned so much from that campaign by being with Chuy Garcia himself. At one point, it was just the two of us. And then it went from, they had a Chevy Suburban, and there was off-duty police officers, and we know the rest of that story. But I was able to zigzag the city with Chuy Garcia, listen to his insight, listen to other staffers that were riding with us. And I tell you, all of these things that I learned on that campaign helped me to have a successful campaign as a state representative. So you just never know when that information is going to resonate and help you later down the road. And so I will tell you, to get involved in a campaign is really it's really a feeder into running a small business and or being an elected official later on and or being a campaign manager. There's so many different roads that you can travel down by just volunteering on a campaign that I think that would be invaluable for a student.
Thank the members of our panel for giving us a very insightful take on Illinois politics. And
thank you all so much for having me.
Yeah, and thank you all for coming.